Tony, it's great to be here with you.
Well, it's terrific to be with you as well, David. Great to see you.
And it's exciting to me that we've been asked to have this conversation about the life sciences. Um, I'll say from my own perspective, if we look at every century in modern times, there have always been one or two innovations, inventions that transform the relationship between space and time and the imagination about what life can be. If we think about the 19th century, it was the railroads. In the 20th century, it was refrigeration, the telephone, and the internet. And I believe that in the 21st century, one of those transforming innovations will be the life sciences. And that just like things that we now take for granted, when you and I were growing up, they were on TV as, Star Trek. And now we can actually do those things. And so I think the life sciences will be one of those transformational innovations in the 21st century. That 30 years from now, by the time we get to 2050, it will have transformed our assumptions about the relationship between space and time, our ability to self-diagnose, to influence, disease, and just in ways that we can't imagine. But what I'd like to start with, I want to, because we've got young people listening in on this, I want to spend a lot of our time, sort of drawing lessons from your career. But the first thing I'd like you to do is to tell us what your definition of the life sciences is. What is this field? Some of us think it's biotech and, biopharma and genetics and genomics, but how do you describe it as a field?
So it's great to be with you, David, as always, and always good to see you. And I loved your introduction because it causes me to think in what ways will our society be transformed as we look several decades into the future. And I have some thoughts because I think we're living in the platinum age of science, which would be a fun topic for us to unpack a little bit. But this thing we call life sciences, as distinct from earth sciences or physical sciences, really has to do everything with the human body, with cells, with the interaction across cells, across neurons, across genes. So anything which touches any of the how the body works in a way. The biological sciences. Now, obviously, there's an element of the chemical sciences because many of the therapies that we use today do involve chemicals, simple molecules that become drugs or medicines or therapeutics ultimately. But increasingly, as we've crossed into the 21st century, hearkening back to your introduction, the gene and the genome sciences are increasingly a part of what's included in the life sciences as well. So we're really standing on the edge of a vast precipice as we begin to unlock some of the things that we didn't even think were possible 10 years ago, taking cells out of someone's body and treating them with a therapeutic and putting them back into the body and having that be an effective therapy. So no chemicals, no molecules, all just straight biological science. And this is the really exciting industry that I've gotten to watch and that I've grown up in. So it's the platinum age of science.
Fantastic. So tell us what your journey was that took you to be at the edge of this new age of science. And I love that metaphor, the platinum age of science, because one reason I think your journey is important is you've been tremendously successful, but we don't see a lot of people who look like you in the leadership or operating at the edge of this platinum age of science.
Well, it was all almost purely by accident, with a couple of epiphanies tossed in there. But I'm trained as an academic cardiologist and trained at Mass General in clinical medicine, internal medicine, and then in cardiology. I'd gotten my undergraduate degree at Duke and had planned to be a staff physician in a hospital, doing teaching, research, taking care of patients. And as I was getting my public health degree, my master's in public health, I had this epiphany moment. Sitting in a class, it was called the Ethics of Public Health, and we studied the various health systems around the world and how they reacted to crises. And we studied Fidel Castro's Cuba and how he managed the outbreak of HIV/AIDS in his country. And many of us will either know the story or have read about the notion that as a public health measure, he rounded up and quarantined all of the HIV positive men in the country, thereby violating their civil rights, their human rights. But in Cuba, with a limited infrastructure for healthcare, it was, he thought, the only way to contain the spread of the virus. So it raises so many questions, but what it raised for me was this whole notion that the rights to civil rights, the human rights, were not inviolable. And therefore, the administration of health and how we deliver healthcare were also not inviolable. We've always thought that everyone in this country should have access to healthcare, and we've taken big steps politically to make that happen in the last decade. But what we accepted as the only way to administer health clearly wasn't, because there were other countries around the world who practiced the healthcare delivery in a very different way. And my simple deduction was, if it could be changed, or if it weren't a law of physics, as it were, then it could be changed for the better. And that's how I got interested in population-based healthcare and ways in which I could play a role in affecting the healthcare and the healthcare delivery of large numbers of people. And that led me to the pharmaceutical industry. Because what other industry, other than hospitals and the direct care delivery system, can you affect the lives of hundreds of thousands of people with new therapies and new medicines? And that was the epiphany moment right at the crossroads at that young age in my life.
Wow. Now, so what I find interesting about that is oftentimes we look at people's careers and we think that when we look at where they wind up, that defines what the theme was that was driving them throughout all of their career choices. So I could look and say, this is a guy who simply, wanted to, exceed in exceptional ways financially by using his scientific background. So he didn't stay in medicine. But you just said something that connects to something that we do here at Morehouse that we're focused on, and that's social justice. And I'm just wondering, as you make your career choices, is there any thread that's run through all those choices that even if they don't add up to other people, they add up to you, because that's really the thread that you've been working as you pursued your life in science?
It's such an insightful question, because it does exactly define how I've made certain choices in my life. I left the practice of medicine, joined Merck for several years, and then moved to Bristol Myers Squibb to be involved in the launch of some new cardiovascular products. And while working at Bristol Myers Squibb, had the occasion to work with an executive coach, fascinating guy, Steve is his name. And he came into my life to help us actually with a breakthrough project. That is how we would redefine what high blood pressure is, which was one of the goals we had. And Steve sat across the table from me as we were working on this project, and he looked me in the eye and he said, "Tony, what are you up to in the world?" And that was a shocking question because I'd never quite contemplated that notion. I thought about the weekend, I thought about a year from now, I thought about my immediate career goals. And after failed attempts at answering with any of those kind of answers, he said, no, you what are you up to in the world? And that question alone changed my life, because what became very clear was I had chosen the path I chose without understanding why, because I wanted to make a difference in the lives of people. I wanted to help transform the lives of people. And if there's been any unifying theme, it's that notion of change and transformation and really creating a deep impact in the lives of people, whether it's by delivering new medicines and improving their health status, or a lot of the work we do now and thinking about social justice issues in addition to health issues, or advancing an economic agenda for Black America. But they all have that consistent thread of what I'm up to in the world. And I'm so glad Steve asked me that question, because it clarified the direction on the horizon that I wanted to tack to.
Fantastic. I want to jump to some questions that have to do with your views about, sort of where we are, both as an industry in the life sciences, but I think it also connects to broader questions about our country and about corporations. You've participated in big corporations like Merck, mid-stage entrepreneurial ventures, like when you came in to be the commercial leader at Vertex, and small startup, you and a bunch of guys sitting around a table with an idea that you thought, that you acted like was a company. Mm-hmm. But I can remember talking to you and you saying, well, there are really only, 9 of us.
Right. A handful, and over our kitchen table, literally over our kitchen table.
Right. What's your sense for where we are in the life science industry, not to mention our nation, as regards diversity, equity, and inclusion?
Well, if you think a little bit about the occasion of the conversation, the national conversation we're having right now, it's just because of the dislocation that George Floyd's death created. That tragic, horrible death has given us a chance to really reflect, both for broader corporate America, but also in the life sciences. And if you think about the notion that there are 2 aspects to it, the internal aspects, that is within the company, and the external aspects, which have everything to do with our stewardship and corporate citizenship outside the company. The conversation in life sciences goes a little bit like this. We would love to have more people of color, more Black Americans, more Latinxes, but we just can't find them. And you and I both know that is just a fallacy, because what that tells me is that you just haven't looked, and you haven't looked in the right places. We spend a lot of time thinking about how we build a pipeline of scientific talent, minority scientific talent. And one of the things I'm really proud to have done was participate in the Merck UNCF program, which ran for about 20 years or so. And we built that program when I arrived at Merck, and convinced the executive leadership at Merck to fund this joint program with the United Negro College Fund. And that program to date has produced the greatest number of minority PhDs of any other program in this country.
Wow. And
the reason I raise that statistic is that the pipeline has been filled with really top talent. Now, science is such a highly specialized area that it's distributed, But I have no doubt that there are brilliant Black scientific minds and PhDs that could fill a lot of the roles within industry. But that's only one half of it, because it's not just the representation inside the company, it's the conversation inside the company as well. And one of the things that this national conversation on race and social justice gives us the chance to do is to turn up the volume on that conversation in almost an unabashed way. So how is it that we, whether we're in the boardroom or talking to stakeholders like shareholders or talking to employees, raising the really difficult topics and the awkward conversations that none of us have really ever wanted to have, but George Floyd, may his soul rest in peace, is causing us to have. And that distinction between internal representation and the internal conversation is where corporate America finds itself. But we're not done, because I look at our great friend, Ken Frazier, the CEO of Merck, and there have been few leaders in this decade who have really spoken powerfully into the moment when asked, that has caused this question of corporate stewardship or citizenship or even just leadership to speak out with a powerful voice when you see something wrong. And he did that when he resigned from the Manufacturing Council that the Trump administration put together. He's done it recently. And we need more of those voices, because we have an absolute leadership vacuum. And if we get the internal piece right with the numbers and the conversation we're having inside the company, and we can step into the corporate stewardship moment, I think we will find a formula that can create change.
Great. Well, you've spoken, I think, eloquently to the corporate side of things. Now, I want to ask you, as I've done on other occasions, for a little coaching and mentoring for me. I run a small liberal arts college on the highest hill in Atlanta that is full of talent, that claims to have produced a disproportionate share of men who've gone on to be leaders in science and in medicine. What should institutions like mine be doing now to prepare our students for their post-baccalaureate opportunities that can take them into the life sciences so that they are at the edge of the platinum age? How do I create my Tony Coles? Because I wake up every day with 2,200 possibilities.
Right. You know, I think if we think about the history of the great institution that you run and others like it, they were really built to provide something that couldn't be achieved elsewhere. That is a basic education for people of color, particularly Black Americans. And that mission alone has been a wonderful mission. It's been a great standard bearer for the time that these institutions have existed, 130, 140 years or so. But what I wonder is whether it's not time to turn the page on the simple provision of the basic education. I wonder, what is it that you can do, your colleagues can do, all of higher education can do, but particularly HBCUs, to ask a slightly different question, which is, what is the economy of the future? And how is it that, in addition to the basic education, reading, writing, arithmetic, is simply put, we're actually looking with an eye towards the future and preparing everyone who comes through these hallowed halls for the economy of the future? So I'm going to predict that the economy of the future will largely be driven by high tech and biotech and or the life sciences, let's just say. So if you have one eye on that as the goal that you're preparing leadership for, then what does the curriculum look like? And beyond the four walls of the school, what does the ecosystem that you're building around students look like? How many high-tech practitioners or biopharmaceutical or life science practitioners ever get the chance that I had, fortunately, a year or so ago when I stepped foot on the Morehouse campus and felt that sacred intention of what that great institution is designed to do. But if we remit a basic education and with an eye on the future of the new economy and shift our thinking, not even ever so slightly, just turn the cube 90 degrees, what's the length of that prism that gets cast? And as the light diffracts through, what's the red response? What's the orange response? What's the violet response for preparation for the economy of the future? I think there's something in there. I think there's really something in there as we up our game.
So let me ask you a question. When you're hiring a young person, either out of undergraduate or, recently out of their graduate programs, what are you looking for that tells you, this person can operate at the edge of this platinum age of science?
So it's clearly where it's the intersection of preparation and opportunity. So let's go back to the basic education we talked about. Let's go back to the expanded notion of the basic education, because a platinum age requires a platinum education, right? Speaking into and looking into the future for the new economy. So let's call that table stakes. That's the basic aspect. But the thing that really unlocks potential, and the thing I always look for in anyone I sit across the table for and thinking about a job, is this notion of intellectual curiosity. So how curious are you about why the world is the way it is, and challenging the basic notions and assumptions that we simply take for granted, like a glass of milk in the morning or a cup of coffee? It just is. That's just how you start your day. You start your day with a cup of coffee, then you do your regular routine, and at the end of the day, you come home. The question really is, where's the intellectual curiosity that causes you to say, how could this be different? And why should we accept what's always been the case? Because if you open up the aperture on that conversation, then you'll be a great problem solver. And what's required for great problem solvers in business is to imagine the impossible becoming possible. And that's the job of a CEO. CEOs' jobs are, or is, to make the impossible possible. And you can't do that without intellectual curiosity. So that's one thing I look for. The other thing I look for, and this was a later life learning, but no less important, is courage. And it's a funny conception, because we actually don't talk often about courage or valor or bravery or any of those kinds of words that evoke these images of knights on horses and in armor and bearing a flag and marching across a field. But for a moment, let's just imagine that courage is really what's missing in the national conversation today, just to plant a local reference. But in business, what I look for is someone who has been beyond the analytics, beyond the data, beyond what the evidence is, said, all that's terrific, but the answer isn't there. And I have my own personal story. Several years ago, I was presented with the opportunity to acquire a company, and our shareholders asked us not to do anything risky. Don't veer off the course of profitability. You're right on the precipice. Deliver the profitability, and we'll figure out the rest, but you just stay the course. And I knew that strategy would last the company 3 years, 3 to 4 years at most. And those same shareholders would abandon us because then we'd have no new growth prospects. So I stared into that abyss, looked at the data, and recognized that the answer wasn't in the data. The answer was actually in whether I had the courage as the CEO. And I remember this as clear as if it were yesterday. It was a meeting on a Saturday morning at 9 a.m. And I said, look, guys, we've been looking at these data for 3 weeks. The answer is always the same. It might not work. We just have to have the courage to actually take the leap and make the decision. And that was a really important moment, because once you tap into that courage, you become fearless. And if you can become fearless, then you can imagine how the impossible could be made possible. And that's the skill set. That's what we need to look into the future.
So, I'm trying to put myself in the place of the 100+ young people who are watching this. And they're all, right now under the age of 25, maybe the oldest one is 30. And if, they're thinking to themselves, they're asking themselves the nature versus nurture question about leadership. Are leaders born, or are they made? And by that I mean, I could sit there and I could think, gee, that Tony Coles, he grew up, he was intellectually curious coming out of the crib. He's always been courageous. He's right. Or I could think, I wonder if there were any crucibles in which that curiosity, that courage were forged, that I could approximate to increase the likelihood that when my time comes, I've developed that curiosity. I've also forged that ability to call forth the courage after reviewing the data. Are there things that you would tell some of our young people to expose themselves to, because they create the context in which you develop these attributes?
This one is so easy, David. It's so easy because it's called the crucible of failure. And what I mean by that is I have failed more often than I've succeeded. And I failed ingloriously sometimes, really, really. And I think the issue is not, whether we encounter adversity. It's actually how we encounter adversity and what we take away from it. So courage really is only born as a result of sitting there on the precipice of some great failure and then picking yourself up and figuring it out. So I think that one's easy. But here's another topic that I really love. People imagine that in order to be a leader, you've got to be a president of a college, or you've got to be a CEO of a business, or you've got to be president of the United States, or any of these vaunted positions that we place people in. When in fact, you could have no one reporting to you, be tending to your piece of the work you're charged with doing, and you can be a leader. So this notion of individual leadership and how we find that moment for whatever we're tasked with, that's really the question. And that's what we encourage all the employees at our company to do. What is it that you, as the CEO of your work, can actually do differently? But I'll tell you, adversity causes this is from a Disney movie. I hate to even quote it, but it's one of the greatest sayings, and that is, from adversity blooms the most beautiful flower. Mm. And I love this notion of how failure as a crucible actually really does call forth the moment to display courage ultimately.
Excellent. Any specific recommendations that you would have for our students who want to move into the world of R&D jobs in the life sciences? Think of them as juniors and seniors and early year graduate students. Other advice, because I think what you just said about failure is profound, and it also, fits my experience, my journey. But any other advice you would give them about how to prepare and manage their careers, um, and even specifically related to what it will mean to be a Black person or a person of color pursuing the route that you pursued?
I think do the work. And what I mean by that is stick with it. I was told that when I was at university, when I was at Johns Hopkins, I was told by my pre-medical advisor that I didn't have the grades to get into medical school. Give up now. You just won't make it. Now, there was some abject truth, because I did get a C in organic chemistry. So, okay, we're not hiding that. But I did also ponder in the moment, and for years after, whether there wasn't a sense that the expectation was set differently for me because I was a Black undergraduate than others who had similar grades. And I just wondered, I pondered about that. And so the reason I say do the work is do the physical work that's required and excel to the best of your ability, but do the internal work to when confronted with a naysayer and someone who will attempt to define and declare and describe your future, do the internal work and ask yourself, will you let that extrinsic force determine your future? I was so angry with him that I was bent on proving him wrong. And he was never more right. He was never more wrong, I'm sorry, never more wrong than that day when he said that. But what he didn't recognize is that it fueled my future. So that's my best piece of advice, because there will be obstacles, there'll be barriers, there'll be all sorts of things, whether they be financial or whether they be grades or whether they life circumstances. Something's going to happen, and you just have to wonder if you can actually do the work to push through that. And we come back to this theme of courage. Well,
If that conversation sowed the seeds to who you've become, the world owes that professor a debt of gratitude.
Well, and I should be so generous as to go thank him. So pray for me.
So I'm conscious of time. I just want to end with your sense of how we should feel about the future. There's a good deal of cynicism, pessimism. We're in what probably is it's definitely the most challenging time of the 21st century. We're seeing things that at my age, I thought I had seen everything, and 2020 came along. What's your view about the future and optimism, skepticism for it? What do you think, it hinges on?
Well, you're asking someone who is an eternal optimist, and you're asking someone who's already said that, my job in life, my profession is about making the impossible possible, really unlocking the mysteries of the brain, figuring out how the brain works to treat Parkinson's and epilepsy and schizophrenia and Alzheimer's and Lou Gehrig's diseases. So by definition, I'm going to tend on the side of, boy, there's a lot of opportunity just waiting to be unlocked. And what's been really fascinating, COVID has taught us a lot of things. It's taught us how to grieve. It has taught us how to accept things beyond our control. And it's brought us some gifts in a way, if you consider that it's fundamentally changed who we are and how we work and what we look like as a society. So if you just take that, something that is so horrible, that's killed 220,000 Americans, yet in that dark cloud, there's been something of value for each one of us, whether it's moving through that grief to joy or moving through an economic, dislocation to right-sizing the opportunity. So I've got to believe that there is something just ahead. Now, I can't chart the course, but here's what I do know. What I do know is that if we accept the status quo, and if we just accept that we live in a world where facts are negotiable, and we have a hyper-partisan approach to everything, from whether you take milk in your coffee or not, that we will fail as a society. And the society that we've all studied for the thousands of years that there's been, modern civilization, suggests that we're not likely to stop. And so I'm optimistic. And yes, things are bad, but things have been darker. I think the plague and the Black Death in medieval Europe was a pretty dark time. I think the Spanish flu, from 100 years ago was a pretty dark time. And we had fewer things in our armament to treat the Spanish flu than we do today. So we've somehow persisted. And if we can look beyond the immediate circumstance, and we come back to courage, and we come back to making the impossible possible, I'm actually one up for the human race.
Fantastic. Well, Tony Coles, I've known you for almost 2 decades to the day. I've learned so much in this conversation about you. So it's been a real pleasure. And I can only imagine that the students who've tuned in to this conversation have taken away gems, and more important, begun to reflect on their own experience and the themes in your experience to move themselves forward.
Well, David, it's been a pleasure for me to be in conversation. And I asked if you would do me the favor and if you would host this discussion, because I wanted to be able to have this conversation with someone I trust. And it has been amazing just to spend this time with you. And if it helps someone, I'd be even more delighted. But thank you for doing this with me. And I will see you around the corner.
All right. Sounds good. Take care.
Thanks, buddy.